Hello, I'm Jim Cline, and I'd like to try to explain a concept that I've had a lot of fun creating. I guess it started when I was really young. I liked to make model rockets inspired by the Buck Rogers and Flash Gordon comics of the time. When I went to college, I was started in as working in the co-op program at White Sands Missile Range, so I finally got to get closer to the dream of space travel I had seemed to always had. I had to build a 40-foot long, 13-foot high car carrying bridge in the late 60s. I had to study a lot about bridge building and understand strength of materials, natures of materials pretty well. As far as I know, the bridge is still in use. But that got me to thinking about using structures to space, and I was one of many people who thought they had invented what now is called the space elevator, an anchor tether that is swung around by the motion of the Earth. It's kind of balanced across geostationary Earth orbit, a little bit more force on the outward centrifugal part beyond zero, tug on the anchor point on the Earth, keep it stable and stretched. I found, though, that some calculations struggled that there wasn't any material anyways near good enough. I did go in and create a effort at a project to make a lunar tether. I found that space-rated fiberglass in 1970, early 70s would be useful as a material for a tapered cross-section. I called it a moon cable, now they call it a space elevator. But it went from the moon surface through the Lagrange balance point between the moon and the Earth, dangled toward the Earth with a little bit more pull toward the Earth, kept it up there, and tractors would haul materials up and down, process materials in the 0G at L1 and cast it into the shape of foam steel gliders, drop off and be picked up in the oceans at the Earth. NASA was interested, but they had no money for it. They were trying to get money for Space Shuttle in 1972. I testified in 1985 before the National Commission on Space, and I got this as a result. My theme was my moon cable tether on the moon, but also more I was talking about Keith Lofstrom's launch loop and Rawhide Star Bridge and Earl Smith's Texas Railroad concepts. Their commission's report didn't include any of those when it came out. I spent years trying to figure out why. The launch loop concept would have a couple of pulleys spread a long ways apart here on the Earth. It would fling up into the air, up to fringes of the atmosphere in a closed loop, come back down to the other pulley, go back over the first pulley and get flung back up into space, carrying rockets up there to be launched up above the atmosphere. It would have the problem of that the pulley's circumference had to travel at the same velocity as the loop material itself. Pulleys would not be able to be built out or anything real to withstand the centrifugal force on them. So I figured out, why not use the Earth's gravitational field as the way to turn a loop around. This created a hoop-shaped thing, like an orbital transfer trajectory from the ground up around the Earth, reaching up to the geostationary Earth orbit, on around the Earth, back to the starting point, around and around. It could be built as in the form of an electric motor, this Earth stationary part, supported by the internal armature, to be traveling quite a lot faster than orbital transfer velocity, and the outward centrifugal force would be designed to support the weight of the stationary structure and the live loads that would travel up maglev tracks on the outside, electromagnetically coupled with the upward rising armature mass stream, and have the spacecraft pulled up by tapping a little bit of energy off. So the spacecraft carry no fuel. They'd be lifted by the structures between ground and geo and gently returned back to the Earth. That was kind of the basic idea. The structure is supported by the centrifugal force, basically, created by the armature, which is outward relative to the Earth, and balanced and slightly stretched, so the structure is stable and slightly in tension. I put this concept on the Genie network on my websites, KESTSgeo.com and escalatorhigh.com. I presented as a paper to the Space Studies Institute in 1997, but they didn't publish. They were aerospace based, I think, was the problem. The American Society of Civil Engineers are more interested in bridges. A bridge to space. I finally got my first peer-reviewed technical paper published in this book on, let's see, find it here in a minute. Here we go. Kinetically strengthened transportation structures. Hopefully you can see some of that. And I had some, I showed the calculations that show that it's 7.3 kilowatt hours energy per pound mass moved from the ground up into geo. This kind of illustrated the principle, the outward force, and here was the structure as seen in the year 2000, and this is a cross-section of the structure. They liked it enough to put me on for a much longer presentation in 2002 in this book, the conference proceedings, and mine was one of the first papers in the developing technologies of space exploration, starting on page 8. Kinetically supported bridge vehicle lift to geo. I created some nice graphics on computer graphics, and they were part of this paper. And so the problem was NASA had paid somebody $1 million to claim that the tether space elevator was ready to build, and nobody was interested in my concept. Mine was just a concept. Since something space elevator, all they had to do was fork up the money and it was ready to go. So bird in hand is worth two in the bush, and they forgot my concept. I did get to present it once more to the American Society of Civil Engineers in 2004, and that wasn't too appreciated because the people doing it had just received a lot of money for rocket technology for the Mars thing in 20 years. And I went on to a different group, which were more into space elevators, space exploration 2005. They actually had me up for all three papers that I submitted, thinking I only get one. And all three papers had their graphics somehow ungrouped and scattered all over, but the text is still in there. I began to realize that there was some objections to my concept. So I went in to the idea of, even though I had always resented people saying that my concepts were science fiction, a friend convinced me that, okay, give up on the technical papers. They really only want to do rockets. Because that's where their investments and education and everything is. So I wrote science fiction, and a 4 science fiction novel saga, starting with Building Up, which involves the space elevator and the sensor station concept, a way of building the classical wheel type space station in low Earth orbit, entirely automated, and docking all the prefab modules which were served as their fuel tank during launch, docked them together into the circle and with spokes in the hub before the first person came up. So it would be a very safe, cheap project. And then I also went into the KESTS instruction, the kinetic energy supported transportation structure, which I mentioned before. I went into this one, which was an adventure story about getting ready to build the first KESTS. Lots of people interfering. I got to play out my real-life problems and fantasy there, a bit exaggerated. Then down to Earth were people who had used the structure to build a ring of cities around the Earth, and they were trying to get back, but people on the ground had destroyed the structure, the KESTS structure, and so they were having a hard time getting back home. And then one sort of toward the end of the thing where they're taking down the ring of cities, having trouble with the old KESTS, which had a lot of service and was starting to fail here and there. So they decided to take materials. Most of the city materials came from the moon, aluminum, and the water ice for shield came from the Earth, but the aluminum had to be taken back to the moon. And so they were looking into reviving the lunar space elevators that was used originally to do that. So that's what those stories are about. And this is my first effort at a movie on this subject, so hope you enjoyed it. This is Jim Cline in Freda, Washington on May 23rd, 2011.